Okay, so let's jump right in. We're talking about this really fascinating, very specific group of people today. A generation that doesn't quite fit. They're not really Gen X, but they're not quite millennials either. They're called Xennials, born somewhere between the late 70s and the mid-80s. And what makes them so unique is this: they had an analog childhood, a world that pretty much doesn't exist anymore, and then they had to grow up into a digital adulthood that seemed to pop up overnight. We're going to unpack what that does to a person's psychology.
Just think about that for a second. Seriously. No GPS dot tracking you on a map, no text me when you're there. You just left. And there was this quiet trust that you'd be back when the streetlights flickered on. If that memory feels real to you, if it hits you in a certain way, then you get it. You understand the huge shift we're about to explore.
All right, let's start at the very beginning, with probably the most defining feature of a Xennial's upbringing, that last analog childhood. It was a world that was really shaped less by what you had and more by what you didn't.
Before there was an endless stream of content, before infinite scroll, there were just long, empty afternoons with nothing to do. And the interesting thing is boredom wasn't seen as a problem you had to solve. It was just there. It was the empty space where you had to make your own fun, where a stick becomes a sword and your bedroom becomes a spaceship. You learned, without even knowing you were learning, how to create whole worlds inside your own head.
And what's wild is that modern psychology actually has a name for what all that boredom was doing to your brain. It's called the default mode network. It's basically the brain state where your mind wanders, connects random ideas, and sparks creativity. For Xennials, this wasn't some special mindfulness retreat. It was just a regular Tuesday. That network became the engine of their inner life, built in all those quiet, boring moments.
And that brings us to another lost art, the simple act of waiting. Waiting for your favorite song to finally come on the radio so you could record it, or waiting a week for your photos to get developed, or just waiting for a friend at the mall at the time you agreed on because there was no way to text them that you were running late. Waiting wasn't some huge inconvenience, it was just normal. And it built this quiet patience, a tolerance for things not happening instantly. It's a massive contrast to today, right? Where a web page that takes 3 seconds to load can feel like a genuine crisis.
The social world was completely different too. It was all physical, immediate, totally unscripted. You learned how to read a room long before you ever had to read a comment section. If you had a problem with someone, you had to deal with it face to face. You couldn't just log off. And this is a big one. Being alone wasn't a crisis. Solitude wasn't the same as loneliness. It was just being by yourself with your thoughts, back before your attention became the most valuable commodity in the world.
So you have this really solid analog foundation. And that's what makes this next part so wild. Because just as Xennials were figuring out who they were, the whole world changed radically. And it forced them to become, basically, technologically bilingual. Just look at this timeline. The speed is just incredible. And it's all happening during the most crucial, formative years of your life. You go from a phone that was literally bolted to a wall, to that unforgettable sound of a dial-up modem, to always-on internet, and then finally to a little glass rectangle in your pocket that completely erased the line between being online and offline.
So this is the absolute key. You weren't a digital native. You weren't born into one world or the other. You had to master two totally different ways of existing. You were old enough to have the rules of the analog world baked into you, but you were just young enough to get fluent in the new digital one as it was being built. And make no mistake, these are two completely different languages. The language of analog is all about body language, eye contact, the meaning of a shared silence. The language of digital, that's about usernames, trying to figure out the tone of a text, and building this carefully curated version of yourself. Xennials had to become fluent speakers of both.
This right here is a core memory for this entire generation. The internet wasn't the air you breathe, it was a destination. You logged on, and then, just as important, you logged off. There was a clear, hard boundary between your real life and your online one. That boundary and the memory of it is so central to the Xennial psyche because they stood there and watched it slowly but surely dissolve.
Okay, so what happens when you're fluent in both of these worlds? You get put into this really unique social position. You become the unofficial translator between the past and the future. You become a kind of bridge. But that role also comes with this strange feeling of being a little bit homeless. And it creates this feeling, right? This sense of, I can adapt to any situation, but I don't really feel like I come from anywhere. You totally get the pre-internet mindset of your parents or older bosses, and you also get the digitally native mindset of younger people. You can hang out in any group, but you never feel like you fully 100% belong to any of them. And you see this translator's job play out in super practical ways. At work, you're the one explaining to your boomer manager why the team is burning out from constant notifications. But you're also the one explaining to a Gen Z colleague why sometimes a face-to-face meeting is still important. At home, you're trying to raise kids who are digital natives, using your own fuzzy memories of boredom and freedom as your only guide.
So you see, it's not a passive thing. Being a bridge isn't about being stuck. It's about being the essential piece of infrastructure that allows everyone else to connect. Xennials became the human architecture holding two incompatible eras together, constantly translating norms and trying to stabilize the change. So, that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. This life of nonstop adaptation, plus a whole series of huge global events that hit at exactly the wrong times, well, it forged a very, very distinct worldview.
Xennials were basically raised on that 90s sense of optimism. You know, the idea that if you just work hard and follow the path, a stable future is waiting for you. But that promise got broken, over and over again. Just as they were trying to start their careers, the dot-com bubble burst. Just as they were starting to feel like adults in the world, 9/11 happened. And just as they were trying to buy a house or start a family, the 2008 financial crisis hit. The path kept changing right under their feet.
And what that created is something you could call cynical optimism. It's a total hybrid. The optimism they were raised with is still in there, this gut feeling that hard work should pay off. But it's welded to this hard-won, cynical knowledge that any system at any time can just fail. You hope for the best, but you are always, always planning for the worst.
And now they hit midlife, and a new pressure gets layered on top. They're stuck in this structural middle. Because a lot of those big life milestones got delayed by all those crises, they're now happening all at once. Caring for aging parents at the same time as raising young kids, all while trying to finally hit their peak career years. They're just absorbing pressure from both sides.
And this, really, is the perfect way to sum it all up. If you're a Xennial and you feel like you're constantly translating or adapting or just caught in between, it's not a personal flaw. It's because you are the living, breathing embodiment of a massive, global, historical transition. Your entire identity was forged in the overlap between two worlds.
And when you boil it all down, that experience leaves you with a kind of cultural memory that is becoming more and more rare, more and more valuable. You remember what it felt like to be truly unreachable. And you remember that it wasn't a crisis, it was just ordinary.
So that leaves us with this one big final thought. As we go deeper and deeper into this always-on, hyper-connected world that has completely forgotten where the off switch is, what's the real value of that memory? What can the people who actually remember a time before all this teach a world that maybe can't even imagine it? It's a huge question, and a Xennial experience just might hold the answer.